impact on the West, I think, is something that deserves re-evaluation from Orthodox Celsius, to actually acknowledge that the West continues the tradition unabated for the entire period. So the continuity, the Orthodox will tell us, oh, we've never changed everything, it's the way it's always been. No, when it comes to iconoclasm, for 150 years you did change it. And the Orthodox only continued the practice of the universal church as it had been preserved in Rome and developed in Rome and in the Western Church, not least in the court of Charlemagne, where the liturgical arts go through a great renaissance. So all of that, I think, for me, means we, as Catholics, have a very positive inheritance. And that means two things. One, I think we can sit at the table of Byzantine art with confidence. It's just as much our art as anybody, because our community, our church, has never rejected the image. Secondly, I think it gives us a broader perspective, and that we can understand iconography as being something that doesn't just have to be a Byzantine form. That the Byzantine form of the icon is a local church, a local culture. The Catholic Church, as the word applies, is universal. And so within Western context, within the Catholic context, I think we can begin to have a little bit more self-confidence and reclaim a breadth of style and indeed a breadth of use. So I think one of the problems with Byzantine iconography is that while it is an absolute genius when it comes to liminal image, how do you make an image that speaks of heaven, that actually is an image that you can venerate with confidence? Look at the Byzantines. They have done it with sheer genius, and it's developed over many years of prayer and so forth. However, at the same time, the Western Church has stained glass. I mean, if you want a liminal image of light, you get your light from the sunlight pouring through color, and it is sublime, creates an ambience. Now, I think one of the purposes of liturgical art is to mark the space. So the liminality isn't so much for the veneration of individual saint, but to really mark off the liminal space, the space of the altar, the place of the temple. It's a consecrated space. And that's expressed in terms of the way it's decorated, not just simply because it's got an icon of the Pantocrator in it, or a statue of the Virgin Mary. The actual space itself is consecrated by bishop, and the altar likewise, and anointed with oil. The art of the space, whether it's the decorative art, or if it's didactic art, actually it's spelling out what the space is for. This goes back into the catacombs, into the very early church. And you think about the catacombs where the Christians meet to pray for the martyrs who have died and are buried there. This is a burial chamber, and the art, for example, of Jonah and the whale, symbols of the resurrection, biblical story about the resurrection. By painting that on the walls, it actually says, this is what is really going on in this space if you look deep. So you can see that the very earliest examples of a consecrated space, the catacomb, it's clear. You look at Jura Europos and the fragments of remains from the baptistry, for example, and the imagery that is there, again, evoking some of the great biblical themes, like the liberation of the Hebrew slaves from Egypt, freedom from slavery, freedom from sin, crossing the Red Sea, then parting the waters, this being a foreshadowing of baptism. So the way in which that space is decorated is resonating, not with images to be venerated, but images that resonate with what that space is for. So we can see, I think, three different types of imagery: liturgical imagery, one which is purely decorative, a second which is really illustrating or marking or consecrating the space with the themes from scripture and the faith, and giving them a visual form articulation. And then the peak are the images for veneration, which are sort of on a parallel, certainly in canon law in the Western Church, with the veneration of saints in their relics. So you venerate the saints in their relics, and you venerate them in their images. And those images are really what we call icons. So that's all good. So I think the Western Church kept that breadth of styles of liturgical art and didn't get bogged down into one particular form. So we kept statues, for example. As I mentioned, we developed stained glass. We had a much more vibrant, dynamic interaction with the whole space. And you think of the Gothic cathedral and the sheer genius of creating this space of light, breaking the walls open with these vast walls of glass. You think of like going into Milan Cathedral, the Duomo, and it's almost like a forest of soaring tree. You're walking through paradise, and the stone breaking out into foliage in the carvings and decoration. All of this is the rich inheritance of liturgical art of the West, and the East doesn't manage that. It goes deep into one particular style of liturgical art and restricted to one form, the flat image. So it's a panel icon, it's a fresco on the wall, it's a mosaic on the wall, a flat embroidery. They really remain constricted by that. And some apologists from within Orthodoxy like to suggest that somehow that's a purer form and this sort of stuff. But most sort of just pass it over. And I think partly because actually there's no reason whatsoever why an image shouldn't be three-dimensional. It occupies a space and consecrates a space, and we live in space, not on these flat surfaces. And when you think about, say, the tympanum over the archway in some of these Romanesque churches in France, for example, they're glorious, but they're not sort of deceptively naturalistic. They really are a living space of transfigured imagery. And I think when you get sort of three-dimensional imagery, when you get relief carvings and so forth, these add a richness to the world of liturgical art. Anyway, one of you with me. I think, given that, I will now draw things to a close, unless there is a question. It'd be lovely to have a question, but nevertheless, I think if there isn't, then I will bring this to a halt. So thanks to those of you who did come and watch, and I'll rethink the format, because I really would love to feel that this is of some value, and that it's creating a little bit of movement in the way in which we as a community think, especially Catholics. And I'd be disappointed if we can't find a way to do that. So if you would like to make a comment about that, I'd be grateful. Or email me or send me a message on Messenger on Facebook. And I'd be grateful for any feedback. Meanwhile, wish you all a very good evening and happy Sunday, and hope you have a great week.